Okay, everybody, we're back with Bill Bengston for part two. And I'm going to get out of the way and let him continue on.
Hello again. This time I'm going to show you a bunch of slides. So I will disappear into presumably a corner of your screen and talk about kind of a rehash of some of the questions Bob and I discussed in the first piece. I'll make it a little bit more focused, a little bit more succinct, and then a segue into how a researcher might address some of those questions. And so you'll see a couple of things. One, clinicians and how they think, experimentalists, how they think, patients and how they think, and that we're all thinking about the same kinds of questions, and that we can, in fact, address those under very controlled conditions. And so I hope to leave you with kind of the excitement of doing research and also the surprises. And that really goes to some of the things we were talking about in the first part. If data come out exactly the way you expected it to, then it's kind of boring. You know, I mean, what'd you get? But if nature throws you a curve, and she's pretty good at that, if nature throws you a curve, then it's exciting. And then you got to go back to the drawing board and get your white out and your markers and rethink things. Hopefully you're continually, as good card-carrying skeptics, you're continually rethinking as new data comes in, pro or con anything. As new data comes in, we're going to know more. We're going to try to figure it out and try to make it come together. And that's the fun. So whether you're coming from the clinical side or the experimental side, you're taking a different approach to the same set of questions. And together, if we're talking to each other, maybe we can make the field move on. And again, I suggest to you the field can move on in these so-called unconventional areas. They can also move on in conventional areas. And I don't think that the plot in either one is different. Though I would, without hesitation and without embarrassment, suggest that the unconventional research is of the highest quality. There's a whole pile of stuff out there which is of the highest quality. Doesn't mean things have been figured out. Doesn't mean we've proven anything. But there's good stuff out there, and people ought not to be defensive about it. So this is simply, we didn't know what to call this, so I just had some issues in doing research in energy healing. And just as a side comment, because I can't help myself, I've got energy in quotes because, as a good skeptic, I'm not entirely convinced that this is an energy. And I know that you're in ASAP, you've got the E word. In my book that I have out is called The Energy Cure. But I'm still not convinced it's an energy because healing doesn't seem to diminish with distance. If we talk about anything approaching what we consider to be energy, if I shine a light on you from 20 feet away and then shine the same illumination on you from 200 feet away, there's a diminishment. That's what energy is. If I talk to you, it diminishes as I move away. I've done a whole bunch of experiments on healing, and it seems distance doesn't seem to matter. And if it doesn't seem to matter, I'm not sure why we call this energy healing. So apologies to energy psychologists, apologies to the name of my book, for crying out loud, but I am a skeptic. Can you see my little pointer here?
Yep.
Okay, so I want to be able to use that. In case you're trying to get a hold of me, here's some stuff. You could stop and gather the things. If you're interested in research, this is a plug. I recommend you look into the Society for Scientific Exploration. So this is among the themes that we were talking about in the first section. If you're a basic scientist, and this could be conventional or unconventional, what are you doing that's of interest to clinicians? If you're a clinician, what are you doing that's of interest to the basic scientist? And another way to put that is the second bullet point: how can lab findings inform clinical practice? If we people hanging out in the lab just hang out in the lab and never talk to people in the real world, that's not a good thing. If clinicians don't talk to the people in the labs, and the labs don't talk to the people in the clinicians who are clinicians, we're not helping the field move at all. So I asked the question here, somewhat rhetorically, how can lab findings inform clinical practice, and how can clinicians help inform preclinical study? Preclinical is just jargon for we're doing stuff in the lab. And so let's phrase the questions that I've raised from a number of vantage points. Let's say, door number one, I'm the guy hanging out in the lab playing with test tubes. Not necessarily literally, but I'm playing with test tubes. Door number two, I'm the healer, using that as a generic, trying to use some clinical approach to help my client. Door number three, I'm the client. What does the lab person want to know? What does the clinician want to know? What does the client want to know? So here's a research question, which can also be phrased in terms of clinical application, or the client. Researcher, can energy healing, again, I'm using it in quotes, can energy healing be demonstrated? And this goes to what Bob was talking about in the beginning. What do you say to people who say there's no proof, there's no data, there's all this kind of thing? Can you demonstrate this stuff under controlled conditions? That's an experimenter's question. From the client's question, so I'm the person who needs help. It's a very simple question. Does this stuff work? And that's the same question that a clinician would ask. If I use this approach, will this work? Now, will this work? I don't care what you're talking about. You can, because it's the same question. Let's say I do, and this is not a side issue or question or even lobbying for a position. Does Reiki work? Well, it's kind of a silly question. Does Reiki work? The more interesting question is, under what conditions does it work? For what? What are the variations in response? What are the doses? I mean, these are interesting questions. But if I'm a Reiki practitioner, will it help this client? That's a clinical question. If I'm the client and I'm going for Reiki, I want to know very simply, is this thing going to help me? If I'm in the lab, I say, can I demonstrate this under controlled laboratory conditions? And I'm not picking on Reiki for or against. I'm just using it because everybody knows about it. So it could be Reiki, it could be EFT, it could be Bengston treatments, it could be anything you want. It's still the same question. So again, an interesting question. This one's phrased in terms of an experimentalist, but you could hopefully phrase the same question in terms of the client, or if you were a clinician. Let's put it in terms now of the client. I come in, I have a condition X. It's an algebraic condition. So I have condition X. And so my first question to you, I'm coming to you as a clinician. So here I am, I'm in the treatment chair, or I'm in the treatment table, or I'm in the whatever it is. Question one, does the stuff, can you fix me? Second question, will it last? So let's say I'm in pain, and you take away the pain. A reasonable person would ask, first, you think you'll be able to help me in my pain? Second, if it goes away today, will it come back tomorrow? Well, that's also an experimental question. Does the stuff last? Can you show it? And does it sustain? The client asks, I'm in pain. Will it work? Will it last? How many times do I have to come back? You can see this is a experimental question also. What are the dose responses? How much treatment? Is there a relationship between treatment and outcome? Is more better? And so it's simply a change in phrasing. But the simplest way to think of this is, I'm the client. First bullet, will it work? Second, will it last? How many times do I have to do this? I have bursitis. Can your treatment help me? I have arthritis. Will your treatment help me? I have a cancerous tumor. Will your treatment help me? Does the type of condition matter? So the question, does Reiki work, isn't particularly interesting. Does it work on what? Does it last? How many times? Does it matter what you have? And again, I'm not singling out Reiki for anything. If you use my technique, Will it work for this and not that? Turns out there's some good evidence about that. I mean, I have a standard joke based on my data, but my data are real. In my particular case, as Bob alluded to in part one, it seems to have a tremendous effect on cancer, but it doesn't affect everything. So because it seems to be able to do cancer, this is real, it doesn't do warts. And I tell this to anybody, they say, you're an idiot. Anybody can do a wart. And you know, you can just go boo and the wart goes away. Well, if you use my healing technique, warts laugh at you. If you use cancer, it applies. Now, if your technique works on warts but doesn't work on cancer, and mine works on cancer and doesn't work on warts, that's not a hierarchy of one's better. That's an interesting research question. It's also to figure out why that is. And if you're a client, I don't care. Can you fix me? If I'm a clinician and I know how to do Reiki and I know how to do Bengston, and someone has a wart, you wouldn't use Bengston. It doesn't work. So do different things work differentially within what parameters? From the point of view of the client, can you fix me? Will it last? How many times do I got to do this? And does it matter what I have? Keeping the questions going. How should we think about healing? Now I'm putting on my researcher's hat. Is healing what I said in the first section, what it's not a psychokinetic effect. I'm not imposing my will on nature. I'm going to make it go away, and I'll do it right now. Or does healing begin a process? Do you need a critical mass of dose? Does it take a while for the healing to go through the body? Is it a phase transition where dose, 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 and then suddenly something changes? Here, phase transition. If you can see that. Glass of water with ice. Well, if I make this glass cooler, it'll get cooler and cooler and cooler. Think I'm treating it, I'm treating it, I'm treating it. And then suddenly, phase transition, it'll all turn to ice. Is that what healing is? Does a certain amount of treatments result in a certain amount of healing, or do you need to get a critical mass of it? From a client's point of view, I just want to know, when are you going to fix me? From a researcher's point of view, what's the relationship between treatment and outcome? From a clinician's point of view, what shall I expect and what shall I tell the client? You see, they're all the same question. Can I combine this with that? So the client asks, I'm getting acupuncture, can I also take aspirin? Is there an interactive effect? Turns out, and we're talking about conventional medicine, there's almost no research at all in conventional medicine on drug interactions. There's almost none. If you look at some patients going to conventional physicians and you get a list of the stuff they're taking, and I'm taking this and taking this and taking this and taking this and taking, particularly the elderly. And so you say, what do you got? Well, I'm taking 12 different prescriptions. How do the 12 prescriptions go together? Do they have negative interactive effects? This is a research question. Do they have negative interactive effects? That's a clinical question. I'm the patient. Can I take this with that? Same questions. Can anyone learn how to heal? Can anyone learn how to do acupuncture? Can anyone learn how to do Reiki? Can anyone do how to... Well, that's an interesting question. So again, I'm beating this to death. Same question, experimentalist, clinician, patient. Now, from my point of view, it turns out I know more about the earlier questions, does it work, will it last, and such, than some of the latter questions. And I'm going to go through and illustrate that. And it turns out that we know very little about some of the latter questions that I raised. So I'm going to talk about here some cancer experiments. I have many more things in cancer experiments. But as Bob has pointed out, the cancer stuff is particularly interesting. But I assure you I have much more than the stuff I'm putting up here. So I'm going to show you some mammary cancers. And this number 2 means I've done 2 formal experiments on mammary cancer at the City University of New York. I've done 2 formal experiments on mammary cancer at St. Joseph's College. I've done 1 at Arizona State University. I've done 3 at Indiana University Medical School. And I can tell you now, I have one going on with a mammary cancer at Brown University. It's going on right now. I'll have the data from that in about a month. A sarcoma, different kind of cancer, I've got 2 formal experiments at the University of Connecticut Medical School. And these are the experiments I'll be drawing upon. I've got 1 experiment at UC San Diego on oncogenic mice. And oncogenic mice simply mean they're naturally occurring cancers. They've been bred to naturally produce cancer in their life rather than being injected with the stuff. I have racy pictures that I won't show you because I don't know if ASAP is X-rated on nude mice. And so I have 1 experiment on nude mice at Brown University Med School. I've done some extremely aggressive cancers at Wake Forest University Medical School. And I am going to show you only 1 result of an in vitro study. And in vitro study means, think of it like stuff in a test tube or stuff in a well plate. These other are actually in organisms. They're in mice, they're in mice, they're in mice. These others were in mice. So I'm going to show you some mice stuff. I'm not going to talk about all of these. And I'm going to show you just 1 example of non-mice healing studies. I have many of them. And so I'm drawing on a large pile of formal experiments in a whole variety of places. When Bob asks, can you show me stuff? Yes. And so I can show you from a medical school, a medical school, a medical school, a medical school, a medical school. You get the idea. And so I got a bunch of medical schools as well as conventional biology labs all doing conventional research, and then I become their worst nightmare, where I come in and I do these unconventional things using conventional scientific techniques. Can this stuff be translated into the lab? Yup. And I'm going to show you how to address some of these questions just very quickly. So here go the questions or the statements. I began with question 1 a couple of slides ago. Can energy healing be demonstrated under controlled lab conditions? Which was the patient's question, does the stuff work? And here, based on the data, I have a proposition. So proposition 1, cancer can be cured using energy healing. I just don't know whether it's an energy. I have an enormous amount of experimental evidence. I have an enormous amount of clinical experience. So I'm not reporting here, triple figures in the number of clinical cases that I'm drawing upon. And I have, you saw a bunch of experiments under controlled conditions. So this isn't speculative on my part. This isn't, maybe sort of, kind of. And I'm also saying that this is in decreasing order of certainty. So proposition 1 is my most certain statement. It is not an interesting question whether cancer can be cured using energy healing. It's simply not interesting. You saw I have, 13 or 14 formal experiments in this. It can be cured. You'll see it. It's no longer an interesting question. If people are asking the question, that simply means they don't understand what has already been shown. And this is where I get to the response to Bob in the first section. What would you say to someone who says, can you show me, or you don't have any good studies? I would flip it around and say, can you show me some of the flaws? What else do you need? If I've got 13 experiments that demonstrate cancer can be cured, will a 14th be the tipping point? I mean, what is it that you need? Do you need 17? Do you need 20? Do you need, and what else in life would you have this amount of data for is really the question. So this question, can cancer be cured, isn't interesting anymore. The later questions are more interesting because I know less, but this is a no-brainer. So here's the general plot These are the experiments on mammary cancer. Most of this is gobbledygook to most people. This simply says you get the stuff from Jackson Labs. That means it's a conventional study. It's done all over the place. You can find it in almost any oncology department. They'll know exactly what this is talking about. The thing that matters, and Bob alluded to it in part one, is the last line, host survival, 14 to 27 days. In these experiments, and there are literally several thousand published experiments using these mice in conventional biology. In the several thousand experiments using these mice that are published in conventional journals, there's never been a mouse that lives past 27 days after it's been injected with this cancer. So if you are a statistician, and I don't know if you can see me in this, the data output forms a perfect normal curve. And in statistical ease, that's meaningful. And for our purposes here, it's just that it's a very predictable outcome what happens. And 100% of many thousands of mice are dead within 27 days. The standard deviation of death is 3 days, which means that 2/3 of the mice will die plus or minus 3 days. You know exactly what percentage are going to die in what day after injection. 100% death at the end. And so what happens in this particular tumor, it's a nice model to use because it's non-metastatic and it just grows and grows and grows, and it just gets bigger and bigger, and so the mice die in a known way, in an ugly way. So I'm going to show you a couple of ugly slides that are about to come up to show you what should normally happen. And this would be the mouse. And what we have here, if you can see my pointer, is this is the tumor. And this is a tumor that's growing and growing. And this is a tumor on a mouse about to die. And even if you're not a biologist, you can see this is not a good looking mouse. The fur is falling out. The tumor has essentially eaten an entire leg. And the mouse is going to die of one of two ways, either from malnutrition or the internal organs are being crushed, and it's usually a combination of the two. It's a very ugly way to go. But you can see that, I mean, animal research is horrible, but there's no real viable alternative to finding these data. So in this particular case, what you're looking at is what should happen. The tumor gets bigger and bigger. It's an ugly way to go. Rodents don't like it at all. They've gotten together and they've bandied and they've lobbied and they've prayed to get a different approach to this. And it turns out that the answer to the rodent prayers is a reasonably simple healing technique. And so I'm going to show you an experimental condition. This is me some years ago. I'm only going to show pictures of myself because although I use student and faculty volunteers, I'm not going to put them up on the screen, so I can give myself permission. This is me putting my hands around a cage at Indiana University Medical School. You can see, if you look around the room, that there's a bunch of cages. So there's a cage up, there's 3 cages on this rack. There's a cage down here. There's a cage in my lap. We've actually got a number of studies going on now. There's a geomagnetic probe taking data. There's a random number generator going on in the room. The room has been color-coded deliberately. So a lot of things are going on. And I'm doing my own healing technique. I'm not going to describe my healing technique. It's published. But I'm not going to describe my healing technique. But I'm just putting my hands around a cage and doing a mental exercise without belief for a specified length of time. So the basic experimental protocol is this. We do it for a particular length of time. Sometimes we do it an hour a day. Sometimes we do it a half hour a day. Sometimes we do it 15 minutes a day. Sometimes we do it every day. Sometimes we do it 5 days a week, 3 days a week, 1 day a week. Sometimes we treat 10 mice at a time. Sometimes we treat 5 mice. I've done a lot of experiments. So we're doing all these things experimentally, trying to gather data. And if we do these techniques in many, many experiments in many different labs, we get an interesting remission pattern. I expected, when I first started this a long time ago that if we got cancerous tumors or we got cancerous mice and treated them immediately, that we would prevent the tumors from ever growing if it were to work. And that didn't happen. And this goes to one of the things Bob and I were talking about in the first part. Healing doesn't happen the way you expect it to. Healing happens according to the way healing happens. And it does not conform to your will. It certainly doesn't conform to my will. So when I started these experiments and the tumors started to grow, I thought that the experiment was failing. And the tumors got bigger, and I kept trying to call off the experiment saying, you know, let's be real, it's not working. And they got bigger and bigger, and then the tumors started to ulcerate. And I said, come on, we can't do this. We got to call it off. And heartless people in the lab said, do it a couple more days, a couple more days. We've never seen this ulceration. And it turns out, against my better judgment, I wanted to call it off. I obviously didn't believe it was going to work. Belief, incidentally, doesn't matter at all in healing. I didn't believe it was going to work. And it turns out that this was just simply the remission pattern. And so what happens is the tumor grows, the tumor looks ugly, although the mouse is otherwise healthy. It develops a blackened area on it. The blackened area ulcerates. I'm going to show you the ulceration in a second. This is a different mouse. And on the white index card, you can see 14 days after injection. It does happen. This is 22 days after injection. This is 28 days after injection. Notice it's already broken the world record. This is 35 days after injection. Now, this doesn't look like a healthy mouse. But it turns out there's viable cancer cells in this. But look at the difference in this mouse and the last one. This mouse, the fur is good. If you could see the eyes are clear. And if I follow this mouse, although it's already broken the world record, you'll see, and I'll show you in a subsequent slide, that the tumors will implode onto itself and the mouse will be cured. The mouse will be cured and it'll also then live its normal lifespan. And you'll see some of that later on. So we've got not only length, we've got documented full cures. I used to use the term remission, and I was chided for that, saying that remission means a suppression of symptoms, and cure is what happens when it's gone and it's really gone. These mice are cured for life. Here's a different kind of cancer. It's a sarcoma. Details don't matter. Host survival, it's a little less aggressive, 45 to 50 days. And notice here, we double lethally inject them. So a normal, guaranteed the mice are going to die is 100,000 cells. We give them at least 200,000 cells. And sometimes we give them double injection of double the amount that'll kill them. We can't kill these mice. Normal tumor progression, same idea, non-metastatic. You can see external tumor, closer of the tumor, and this tumor will just continue to grow and grow and grow. But if we do the treatment, something along the lines of what you just saw, again, it doesn't make a difference whether it's me or somebody else who does the treatment. These particular cancers disappear in one of two ways. The brown mice with the mammary cancer all develop the ulceration and implode. These sarcomas get cured in a couple of different ways. One, it's almost as if the air is let out of it. So you have a tumor and you come back, you can see the arrow. We don't know why the arrow develops on the back of the mouse. And so we have a good-sized tumor, and then the next day it's like someone let the air out. Or sometimes it goes through the implosion. And so sometimes just shrinks, sometimes it goes away. Now again, same tumors, same cancers, same mice, same strains. One in the cage the air will just be let out of it. The other in the cage, same healer, it's going to implode and get cured in a different way. Now, why does it get cured in a different way? And the answer is very simple. We don't have any idea. I mean, we simply have no idea. There's variation in response. They're all getting cured, but they're getting cured in different routes and at different rates. Same will be true in people, same will be true in cell cultures, same will be true. The rules of healing are interesting and complex. Once they're cured, you can tell it's as if this mouse never had it. That you can't find cancer in this mouse's body. You couldn't find them in the other brown mouse's body. We keep them for their entire lifespan, and they're cured for life. So, does it work? It's not an interesting question. Too much evidence to show that it works. Here's another question, though. Think from the clinician's point of view. Think from the patient's point of view. Will it last? Proposition 2. This is now a researcher's statement. Once cured, cancer is cured for life. And for this, otherwise it wouldn't be a cure, I have experimental evidence, and I also have triple figures of clinical experience. And I'm not going to give you all that much detail on all of these, but just to get the plot across. So after energy healing to full cure, no mouse has ever had a recurrence. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of mice. No mouse has ever had it come back. We can, second bullet point, repeatedly re-inject them for their entire lifespan, and without healing, they're immune to cancer for the rest of their lives. That's interesting. So this is data. How, why, I don't know, but I can tell you the what. The what is, the mice are cured for life. We can't give them cancer again. Third bullet point has a qualifier. As far as I know, no person has ever had a recurrence. I don't know that in the same way that I understand experimental, because in experimental, I've got the mice I control the mice. When people get better, I don't know what happens to them the rest of their lives. So 25 years ago, someone was fixed. Are they still fixed? I don't know. And that's called in research a file drawer problem. What happened long term? I don't know. This is a problem, incidentally, clinically. So you, as the clinician, apply the healing technique, and the person seems to be better. Do they stay better? You don't know. That's the reason we need to go into the lab. You can probably find out clinically, do they get better? But do they stay better? You don't know. And so in clinical work by myself and others using my technique, no person has ever had a recurrence, but it's as far as we know. I can't bet the ranch on that. I can bet the ranch on the mice. I can't bet the ranch on the people. Again, this illustrates the power of the experimental method because I can control the environment. I'm speculating, last bullet, there may be an immune factor that can be transferred. We've just begun a series of studies on that right now. Is there something immunologically being stimulated in the mouse? Is there something immunologically being stimulated in the person? I don't know, but it seems like it could. The mice are immune to future injections for the rest of their lives, and it's more than that. I can take blood from a cured mouse and put it into an infected mouse. That will cure that mouse. And so I speculate there may be something that is transferable. So we're trying to figure out right now, and I've just begun a series of experiments that will last certainly through the entire summer and probably through the fall to see if we can bottle this stuff and turn it into a more conventional application. Won't know. Who knows? We'll see what nature throws in my face. I'm sure no matter what it is, I will be surprised. Patient sits down, asks, can you fix me? Will it last? And now the third obvious question, how many times do I have to come back? Now again, it could be a Bengston treatment, could be acupuncture, could be EFT, could be Reiki, could be. It's the same question. How many times do I need an acupuncture treatment? The patient wants to know. The clinician presumably wants to be able to tell the patient something. Well, you need to come out for 5, 10, 4, 1. I don't know. But this is also a researchable question. So proposition 3, there's a dose response to treatment. If you're a researcher, you talk in terms of dose response. If you're a patient, you say how many treatments. If you're a clinician, you wonder how many treatments. If you're the researcher, though, is there a dose response out there? Now, I have a bunch of technical data that will back this up, but the amount of treatment needed to remit any type of cancer is really at this point unknown. That it can be cured is known, but how many treatments is necessary? Is it a number of treatments? Is it a cumulative length of treatment? Now, the second bullet point, there are a wide variety of clinical responses. There's also a wide variety of experimental responses. Look at the last bullet point. Is each treatment dose equal? And I think that's a really interesting and unexplored question. So I'm the clinician. Let's say I'm doing Reiki. Is an hour Reiki treatment twice a half-hour Reiki treatment? Is there a limit to how much Reiki a healee can take in at a given time? If I space it out, do I get a better effect than if I bunch it together? So should I give you an hour treatment of X or 2 half-hour treatments? Is there a certain amount you can take in? And think of this, think of healing kind of like the offering of a multivitamin. I give you a multivitamin, you take a daily multivitamin supplement. The vast majority of the multivitamin supplement is going to be excreted from you. Now, what you excrete Monday may be different from what you excrete Tuesday. But is it better to take a multivitamin every day, or shall I take 7 every Sunday? Well, it's the same question. You see, it's the exact same question. Shall I get Reiki'd every day, or shall I get a real monstrous one once a week? Is there a certain amount you're going to take in and you excrete most of it as waste? Another way to put this, most crudely, does healing come from the healer or the healee? Were this a different course, I'd suggest to you that healing is likely to come from the healee, and that we can't put this into a simple formula. You need this many for this length, for this, and I can put it in, stick it in a textbook, put it in a manual, and say, this is what you should do. I think that's crazy. That's crazy talk. This pill is used the exact same way by every person. That's crazy talk. So the dose question is pretty interesting from a patient's point of view, from a clinician's point of view, from an experimentalist's point of view. And it's a tough problem, particularly, is every dose equal? If it's a human applying the dose and I give one of my treatments, do I give the same treatment every day? Am I like a toggle that goes up and down? I don't know. It's a real tough problem. If Bob gives a technique for a half hour and I give the same technique for a half hour, are they equal? Are all dosages equal? Is he better some days and worse on others? Is it cumulative? Do you hit a phase transition? See, there's a lot of interesting questions. Anybody who writes a manual that says, do this, this happens, I'll just sit here and be skeptical. And that's as kind as I can be. That you expect X produces Y. I don't get X produces Y in mice. I get an outcome, but it's not a simple outcome. Some of these mice take 40 days to be cured. Other mice are taking 70 days to get cured. Same healer. Different healers, maybe there's a different rate. It's a very complex problem. To put this into a simple formula, I think is bordering on madness. It is certainly, it's not bordering on, it is the height of arrogance. Does it matter what I have? Asks the patient. I'm putting in terms of cancer. Does the type of cancer matter? Is what the patient would say. And presumably the clinician would want to know the same thing. And it turns out, at least in my data, that I have experimental evidence and clinical experience, more aggressive cancers get remitted or cured faster. So if the bottom line is this may be declining in confidence. I've got some data that is going to make me keep rethinking. But as a generic, and you're asking, does this treatment work on, it's not even a question of does this treatment work on cancer, which types of cancer respond differently? And does the response of the cancer, is that a function of dose? Is it a function of the number of treatments? Is it a function of the general health of the person? Is it a function of the age of the person? Is it a function on the, I guess, competency of the healer? Is it a function, I mean, I can keep going. These are interesting questions. It's not even a question of cancer, it's a question of, does it matter with the type? And I'm getting preliminary indications, aggressive cancers are easier to do than less aggressive cancers. More aggressive is better. And that's pretty interesting. And also may give you the idea that the energy in energy healing may not be due to the healer. The energy may be coming from the healee. If I were to really speculate, and don't bet a nickel on this one, healing is informational. The healing energy is the energy of the healee. I'd go more tops 3.5, 4 cents on that one. I don't think I'd go to a nickel. So it is the energy comes from, you have a very aggressive cancer, you have a great deal of energy. If the cancer had the information to turn it around, it's going to go away very quick. If it's a wimpy cancer that limps in, there's not much energy. So I can treat it and treat it and treat it, it's going to limp out. If it limps in, it tends to limp out. If it comes in like a freight train, it tends to leave like a freight train. So in mice experiments, you saw brown mice, which are more aggressive than the white mice. The brown mice get better faster. In humans, same patterns. If you have a cancer that comes in like a freight train, retinal blastoma, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, they leave very quick. Something that limps in, think energy healing, not much energy. And I'm talking about the non-aggressive form of prostate cancer. Non-aggressive form of prostate cancer has almost no energy. And so it's extremely long to get rid of that, stuff like that. Retinal blastoma, simpler case. So, person comes in and says, will this work? Will it work on what? And then will it work on what? X doesn't produce Y. In conventional medicine either. I take the pill, you take the pill, different outcomes. I take the healing energy, you take the healing energy, different outcomes. What are the rules of the different outcomes? Boy, I want to know that as an experimentalist. Boy, does the patient want to know that. Boy, does the clinician want to know that. And here's the bottom line, folks. In both conventional and unconventional treatments, almost nobody knows anything about any of it. This stuff isn't different than conventional medicine. You give 100 people the anti, and you're going to get 100 different responses, and they're all taking a conventional pill. Whether you're trying to bring down their blood pressure, you're trying to bring down their cholesterol, Person A takes the cholesterol drug, wild things happen. Person B takes it, almost nothing happens. Why? Same pill, same allegedly cholesterol. Same thing here, same mice, same healer, same still wildly variation in the response. Nobody pays attention to that stuff. They ask the question, does healing happen? It's a silly question. It's an unrefined question. It's a naive question. Has healing been demonstrated? That's not even interesting. Of course it has. Do we know much about it? No. Do we know much about it in conventional terms? No. Patient comes in and sits down. When's it going to work? So I come down, I sit down. Is it going to work? How many treatments? How long will it take? Will it last? All those kinds of things. Here I am in pain, and you come along, you put your hands on me, because it's a hands-on technique, and I leave and I'm still in pain. Does that mean nothing happened? You come in, you put your hands on me, I'm in pain, and I leave and my pain's worse. Did something happen? Should I get a little treatment and a little reduction in pain, and a little treatment, a little reduction in pain? There's an implication here that there's a linear relationship, a negative linear relationship between treatment and outcome. But what if healing doesn't respond in a negative linear fashion? What if healing, there is a dose response, and what if you need a critical mass? What if healing is more like a rock at the top of a hill? And the healer is the person giving the nudge, and giving the nudge, and giving the nudge. And then healing takes its course. Nature takes its course. Other things take over. What if you need a critical mass of healing before something happens? Like, I need a critical mass of temperature to get this to boil. I need a critical mass of temperature to get this to freeze. So I'm making it warmer, warmer, warmer. Suddenly it's gas. I make it cooler, 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 and suddenly it's solid. I'm treating, I'm treating, I'm treating. It seems like nothing's happening. Well, if you look at the response to healing in the mice stuff that you just saw, I predicted, I'm almost always wrong, I predicted that if I got the healing early enough and I treated the mice early enough, that I could prevent the cancer from developing. Well, that didn't work. And so the tumors got bigger and bigger and bigger. I didn't like that. It wasn't conforming to my idea how healing should happen. And then they start to ulcerate. Well, it turns out these things are happening also in bursts. And so I'm going to show you something experimentally, but we also have clinical experience on this. Patient comes in and says, I've got X. You give a treatment. I still have X. Another treatment. I still have X. Another treatment. I still have X. Is this thing not working? Well, is it not working or you didn't give it enough time? Is there a certain number of treatments necessary? Is it a certain amount of stuff your body can take in? Or maybe it just doesn't work. In the case of me and warts, I think it really doesn't work. I don't think my stuff cures warts. I don't think it affects warts. That's interesting. Reiki affects warts. That's equally interesting. What's the difference? That's really, really interesting. But does it happen in bursts or does it just shrink? Well, here's my experience. These are two simply wonderful pictures. This is a mouse with an ulceration, pretty obviously. Now you can see how clear the coat is. Look how clear the eyes are, too. This is a happy mouse. Doesn't look like it should be happy, but it's actually a happy mouse. It's running around in a cage, playing around with its friends in the cage, hanging out, doing all that kind of stuff. It's 22 days after injection, and I'm going to show you the exact same mouse 6 days later. So this is the mouse 22 days subsequent to injection. This is one of the treaters. It was actually a student, non-believing student. I've never worked with believers. A non-believing student. And so this is 22 days after injection. They're using my technique. And now here's the same mouse 6 days later. And this is a biologist pulling away the fur, looking for where it was. Now, 28 days later, obviously we broke the world record, that's not the point. Look at the difference between this and this. So here I am, 22 days into getting treatments. It was actually 19 days into, because we started on the third day. But 19 days into getting treatments, 22 days after injection, and you look at this mouse and I ask you, did healing happen? No. Well, I mean, it's not dead, but it's ugly, and it's got ugly things in it, and if we do histology on this stuff, we're going to find cancer cells in there. So is healing working? No. Well, look at it 6 days later. It's cured. Think patient. Here I am 22 days after getting hands-on treatment. When's this thing going to work? Maybe tomorrow. Maybe. I mean, really, look at these mice. Look at the difference. And this happened, incidentally, I had 6 cages going in this experiment, 6 different healers trained in my method, and this happened across all the cages. So something wild happened in these 6 days. It occurred in bursts. So it's not treatment, a little better, treatment, a little better, treatment, a little better. Everything's getting worse. It's ugly. The bad things are happening to these mice, and suddenly it's all gone. Look at this 35 days later. There's no sign it ever had anything. And we do histology on this. There's this mouse, it appears as if it's never gotten cancer. There's not a single cancer cell in the mouse. We can re-inject this mouse with cancer, and it can't be given cancer again. That's pretty interesting. But my point here is, if I looked at this mouse on day 22, I would say, hey, buddy, your healing's not happening. On day 28, you go, well, that's weird. The cancer's gone. Healing occurs suddenly, dramatically. This is a really difficult problem for a patient. I'm sticking needles in me. I'm getting acupuncture. I'm still in pain. I still have the, and so when do I decide that it's working, and when do I decide that it's not working? That's a tough, tough, tough clinical question. And that's a tough, tough, tough question for a client. And this is where the benefit of laboratory work comes in. Across cages, sudden bursts of healing, and anecdotally, people report similar stuff. Suddenly, something happens. And in another talk, in another time, I can also show you bursts of weird stuff. Random number generators suddenly go crazy. Geomagnetic probes suddenly go crazy. We're not going to do that in detail. Question for the client, for the clinician. Can healing be combined with conventional treatment? Well, I don't have experimental evidence for this, so I'll give you a speculative proposition just from clinical stuff. Some types of energy healing, I'm using energy loosely, may not be compatible with some types of conventional medical treatments. And this becomes a very serious clinical problem, becomes a very serious problem for the client. And I'm not going to pretend that I know the answer to it. This may sound silly, but it's not meant to be facetious. Look at the second bullet point. Maybe healing and killing are incompatible. The purpose of healing is to heal. In the case of cancer anyway, the purpose of some cancer treatments is to kill. Not the host, but it's to kill cells. So if I radiate a tumor, I'm trying to kill it. If I put hands on, I'm trying to heal it. Maybe healing and killing ought not to be combined. This turns out that, first bullet point, clinical failures have been associated with conventional treatments that kill, done at the same time or soon around the same time of healing. And it's possible that healing and killing are incompatible. This is a pretty easy thing to experimentally verify. I just haven't done it. So it's a pretty interesting question. And then finally, and I'll wrap this up, a question, Can I learn, and the client wants to know, can I learn to do this for myself? Or I want to be a clinician, can I learn how to do this? Proposition 7, healing can be taught. I'm not sure. It is certainly the case that virtually all healers were taught, but my bottom line here is there are no control studies. There are many anecdotal suggestions, but there are no control studies. If you come to me and you're inexperienced and a skeptic, and I teach you my technique and then I give you cancerous mice, and you go out and you cure those mice, that's interesting, that's what I just showed you, but it's not a demonstration that healing can be taught. It's a demonstration that you can heal cancerous mice. Did my technique do it for you? I don't know. And that's what I mean, there's no control studies. So is there something unique about my technique? I don't know. Could you have done it anyway? I don't know. There's no real pre-post studies on this. And it turns out this is a very, very, very different or very, very difficult problem trying to resolve. It's pretty nutty out there on this question. And I think we should stop at this point. And we're going to pick up, I think, part 3 with loose ends, and there may be methodological confounds with resonant bonding and things like that. But I'll leave that to Bob to lead. So I'll give you just a quick overview of some of the stuff we were talking about in part 1. The data are interesting. The question, does healing work, isn't a good way to ask the question. Does healing work to fix cancer isn't a great way to phrase the question. Has there been evidence, overwhelming evidence, that at least one form of healing can affect cancer? Yes. But does that explain dose? Does that explain how long it takes? Does that explain mechanism? Does that explain what to expect if you're a client? Does that explain what to expect if you're a clinician? It turns out it's a really, really, really difficult problem. And I hope you can see from this some of the advantages of doing lab work, because I can keep the mice in a cage for their life. I can't do that to my clients. I can't do that if I'm a clinician. What happens to people? People are a very, very difficult and complex problem. Laboratory animals are a difficult and complex problem, but a little bit more manageable. So the advantage of doing stuff in the lab is you have a slightly better controlled environment. It still doesn't answer all the questions, and we know very, very little about this stuff, either in conventional or unconventional healing. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and let me just to fill in, based on what you said earlier, while working with mice has certain advantages, you can control them, there is the big problem of, but they ain't people, they ain't rats.
Yep.
So anything that you find there is interesting data, and maybe it's transferable.
Yep.
But that's all it is. It's just
yep.
data. It's not hardcore proof.
And the answer, when you're doing stuff clinically, let's say you come in and you're a person, and the clinician puts hands on, uses some sort of healing technique, and the person has a tumor, and we'll just fast forward, sometime in the future, the tumor's gone. Well, if you're the client, you're happy. If you're the clinician, you're probably happy. But notice how there's a dark cloud overhead that wonders, why did it go away? Was it time? Would have gone away anyway. Was it something unique about the person? Was it the healing technique used? And you could also say the same thing about the conventional pill. Was it the pill they took, the pill they didn't take, the healing they did, the healing they didn't?
Was it intention? Was it so-called placebo, which we'll talk? All these are.
And maybe it was just one day they woke up and they ate a grapefruit.
Got it.
I'll leave it out the grapefruit.
Well, this is great, and we'll pick up our section 3. We're going and our next section to some of these other issues. Thanks, Bill.
See you in a bit.